I told him I thought his boss was more attractive as a joke, but he took it to heart. And then, I thought I was being playful when I told him his boss was very attractive, but I didn't realize it was the first crack in the foundation of everything we built, and the door I opened to ruin my marriage. So, Reddit community, please, I need you all to hear me out and give me your advice on what I should do next, because I really need my marriage to work again. Please, no biased advice or hate comments. We are all humans and we are not perfect. I am losing my mind each passing day, and I am struggling so hard to accept the reality of my situation, but I can't. I swear in my life I never intended for anything to go wrong, until I realized that I used my own hand to ruin the perfect life I had. Okay, let me tell you everything that happened. My name is Anna and my husband's name is Ken. We dated for 4 years before we got married 5 years ago. Yes, I had 4 good years to choose between him and another guy, or to get distracted. But I wanted him and only him. When we relocated to our new house a year after our wedding, I stopped working as I was still recovering from my miscarriage. My last work as a banker was tedious. Ken and I had decided that I would quit working for some time, but maybe in the future if I ever wanted to start again he would be okay with it. I became comfortable at staying at home, practicing different food recipes. Ken was totally fine with it. In fact, aside from working in the office, he created a home office, and he tried his best to leave work early and complete any unfinished task from his home office just to be around me. Ken was very kind, and he felt guilty that he let me work when I was pregnant, and that led to the miscarriage. But I told him not to put the blame on himself, and gradually we were healing from it. During this period, Ken would go the extra mile just to make me happy, and even before this he has always been a romantic and caring partner. He gave me everything I wanted, and told me my happiness was his happiness. He even reduced and declined extra shifts just to be with me. That was how lovely he was. My friends envied our marriage so much, and I loved how they do wish their relationship and marriage could be like ours. Then we had our boys, Jamie and Ethan. Ken, as expected, became a very kind father many children dreamt of having. He built pillow forts, coached soccer games and read bedtime stories in the most animated voices, something I was lazy to do most times. When he learned about the promotion opportunity, he motivated him to start putting in extra effort to achieve it. It was an opportunity of a lifetime, what we ever wanted, and what would be enough to cater for our growing family. I was very happy for him and proud of him. I had another thing to boast about while chit-chatting with my friends. I didn't let my friends know exactly what's going on in my marriage, but some good news is worth bragging about. Ken had worked so hard for years and he deserved every bit of recognition. At first, the long hours of work that came after he became aware of the promotion didn't bother me. I understood the stakes, the pressure he must have felt to succeed. It was just a busy season, he'd assured me every time he kissed my forehead before disappearing into his home office, and I believed him. And then he finally got the promotion. Aside from getting promoted, he became Michael's favorite. Michael is his boss. In the office they do keep it professional, and outside the office walls these two were good friends, and that didn't affect their working relationship. I was aware of their friendship, but I had never seen Michael before. Again, another promotion came up. Of course, I didn't want him to be in one position forever. So I was ready for this one, and I was looking at the bright side of it, because when he finally gets the promotion he will do less work, have more time for himself and his family, while getting a bigger pay. So I fully supported this particular one. But this period was supposed to get better. This one didn't. Weeks turned into months, and Ken became a ghost in our home. The man who once played hide and seek with the boys until they got exhausted and fell asleep was now too tired to even sit through dinner. Weekends were no longer fun, they became extensions of his work week, all in the name of leading a major project. I tried to keep the boys occupied, telling myself it was just a phase. But deep down I missed him. We all did. It wasn't just his absence that hurt, it was the growing sense that he was slipping away from us and we were losing him day by day. I started noticing things like the way he avoided eye contact when I asked about his day, the late-night phone calls he took in hushed voices, and the way he'd stiffen whenever I entered his home office unexpectedly. My mind began to wander into dangerous territory. Was it just work? Or was there something more? At that point, who wouldn't have suspected that something was off? I couldn't keep it to myself anymore, so I decided to confide in my friend Laura. She's been my rock for years, the kind of person who tells you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. When I poured out my concerns, she listened carefully. She told me she was not suspecting him of being up to anything, and that I needed to trust my instincts. If something feels off and it keeps eating me up, then I should figure it out myself. Maybe follow him one day when he goes out and see for myself. The idea made me uneasy, but Laura had a point. There had been a time years ago when I'd felt a similar distance between us. Back then it had been work, just as he claimed. He was under so much pressure, and I let my insecurities get the better of me. When the truth came out, I felt terrible for doubting him. But this time something felt different. This time, I couldn't shake off that nagging suspicion that there was a skeleton in the cupboard. Then there was Michael. He first came into the picture shortly after Ken's first promotion, during one of the many company events I attended to support my husband. He was charismatic, a man who could command the room with his presence alone. And I just admired the aura. Honestly, there was nothing more to it. When he approached me, his charm was disarming. He complimented my dress and joked about how Ken must be very busy that night to notice how beautiful I looked. I had laughed, flattered by his words, and even mentioned it to Ken later that night. To my surprise, Ken didn't find it funny. He told me Michael was actually like that to everyone, and I shouldn't read too much into it. His tone was cold, and I myself was annoyed because I didn't read any meaning to it. I was only hoping he would be a little sorry for inviting me to his company's event without being beside me. I understood he had some background work to do as the event was going on, but at least I needed my partner. Instead of being sorry for that, he was mad over a mere compliment. It led to a misunderstanding, one that lasted for days before we eventually sorted it out. I assured Ken that I only had eyes for him, and he promised to make more time for our family. For a while it felt like we were back on track, but promises are hard to keep when work takes over your life. One evening, after Ken left the house for yet another late-night work, I felt the same loneliness creep back in. Suddenly Laura's advice echoed in my mind. That night, I decided to see for myself what was keeping Ken away. I followed him carefully from a distance, only to see myself in front of his office. He was exactly where he said he was heading to. I guessed he left some documents he badly needed to carry out a particular task that night. Relief flooded through me, but so did a deep sense of guilt. He was working hard for us, for our family. Why wasn't that enough for me? Still, that loneliness remained. And then came the day when Michael's charm found its way back into my life in a way I hadn't anticipated. It was at a company charity gala, one Daniel had insisted I attend, despite knowing he'd be tied up with work all evening. I told him I wanted to spend time with the boys, but he was persistent, so I finally agreed. As the event wound down, Michael offered to give me a ride home. He was heading towards my direction for another event, and Ken had something to tie up before leaving. I hesitated, but the boys needed me and Ken told me I could go. Remembering the misunderstanding I had with Ken in the past because of Michael, I felt uncomfortable, but I didn't want to make a scene. Reluctantly I agreed. The ride started innocently enough as silence ruled. The silence in the car became so awkward and was eating me up, so I decided to start a conversation. We talked about the event, how he became close with Ken and Ken's dedication to work. Then his tone shifted. He told me Ken was lucky to have someone as understanding as me, and that it's not easy being married to a man who's always working while I take care of 2 kids at home all by myself. His words struck a nerve. For months I had been burying my loneliness trying to justify Ken's absence, but there Michael was, acknowledging it, validating the feelings I had tried so hard to suppress. He added that he knew how lonely I felt most of the time, and that I deserved to be seen and appreciated. Those words really hit me hard. For a moment, I let his words wash over me. There was a part of me that wanted to believe him, to let his words and charm fill the void Ken left. But Michael was not in any position to get personal with me, so I thought of my husband and all the sacrifices he was making just so that we could be fine, and I pulled back, both physically and emotionally. I didn't know why Michael said that, be it pure concerns or whatever, I didn't care. The rest of the ride was silent. When we reached my house, I stepped out of the car without a word or a backward glance. That was kind of childish, I admit. He didn't do anything wrong, although he felt otherwise. Maybe he shouldn't have commented on my marriage. He had no right. So that night, as I was about to go to bed, I felt the urge to make things work between Ken and I. I couldn't let his distance build a world between us. We needed to find our way back to each other, at least for the sake of our children. I didn't want to bother him that night, as it has been a long day already. So the following evening I made the first move. I walked into his home office where he was buried in his work, and placed my hand on his shoulder. He looked up, surprised. I asked him if we could talk. He agreed and set his work aside. I poured out how I felt about the long hours and the constant absence was suffocating, and not just me but the children as well. They missed the father they had, and he couldn't even notice that I was drowning. He actually answered me in a calm tone, explaining that he was working hard for us, for our future, for the kids' future. I could feel the frustration in his voice, as though my pain was an inconvenience he had no time to address. He told me that the promotion he was chasing was the key to everything, a better life, security, the fulfillment of dreams we had once shared. I totally understood him, but he didn't understand me. To me, his answer made it clear that he saw my struggles as a failure to appreciate his efforts, not as a cry for connection. That's how I saw it. I felt a wall go up between us that night, one neither of us seemed willing to break. In the weeks that followed, our home became a cold and quiet place. I threw myself into the routine of managing the boys, the house, and everything else that came with being a mother and wife. Ken, meanwhile, seemed more distant than ever. He worked late at night, left before dawn, and all his attention was consumed by endless meetings and deadlines. One evening, as I stood folding laundry in our bedroom, my thoughts drifted back to that gala event and Michael's words to me, but I quickly dismissed the thought. It wasn't long after that Ken had to leave town to visit his mother. The woman was very sick. Not that I didn't care about the mom, but I nodded, pretending to understand, but inside I felt my resentment grow. I wasn't trying to be self-centered, but the minute he heard his mother was sick, he had to be there for her. What of the promotion he wanted so badly? Won't it affect his work? And what about me? He said he was so occupied and didn't have time for his own family. I get that his mother was badly sick and she had no family aside from him, but still it didn't stop me from feeling the way I felt. During his absence, I found myself thinking about Michael and the way his words had felt like a balm on my weary soul. I told myself it was innocent, just a distraction from the monotony of my days. Then, one afternoon, as I struggled with Jamie's tantrum and Ethan's school homework, I received a message from Ken saying he will be extending his visit. I became very angry and exhaustion overwhelmed me. But I controlled myself in front of the kids. I didn't know how much more I could handle alone. Later that day, Michael came around to drop some files for Ken. Ken had already told him to bring the files before extending his visit. He greeted me shortly, then he asked about the boys and about me. His concerns were pure and I felt like crying out in front of him, but I told myself no. I told myself I didn't need anyone else, that I could manage. But the next week, when Jamie fell ill and I couldn't get Ethan to go play games with his friends, I found myself reaching out to Michael. He told me not to panic, and he exhibited the confidence of someone who had been through it all before. He helped with Ethan while I stayed with Jamie, and later that evening when the house was finally quiet and the boys were asleep, he stayed for a cup of tea, and I couldn't keep things to myself anymore. Although I hid exactly what I was going through, we talked about parenting, the challenges of marriage, the loneliness that sometimes came with it. He told me about his own struggles of being in the city while his wife and his daughter were far from him, but he visited them from time to time, and that was all we discussed about that night before he left, nothing more. Ken's mother's situation was getting worse, and I couldn't visit because the boys had to be in school, and I had to be there to take care of them. Michael had told Ken to take all the time he wanted. Then it happened slowly, almost imperceptibly. Michael and I started spending more time together. Michael would drop by to check on the boys and me, while Ken could stay a day or two without calling home, and I didn't care to call him. Michael became a presence in my life, a source of comfort and support. And somewhere along the way the line between friendship and something more began to blur. But I kept telling myself that nothing will happen. Michael gave me the support I badly needed, and I shouldn't chase him away, but rather I should kill the growing feelings that had started to creep in. The first time Michael kissed me, I was overwhelmed with guilt. I told myself it was a mistake, and that it wouldn't happen again. But the truth was I didn't want it to stop after all. It was just kisses and resting on his shoulders, and it won't go far. But then it went far. We did it, we had a crazy intimate moment. Something we shouldn't have done, but it happened. And for the first time in years I felt seen, valued, desired. A few days later Ken returned home, but remained oblivious. He said he had to meet up with everything. The work he left behind, and just like that he became too consumed by work to notice the change in me, and the way I had begun to withdraw from him. I told myself it was his fault, and that his neglect had driven me to Michael's side. Then one day, Ken opened up to me about everything that happened with his mother. The woman was fine, but he was mad at me for not checking up on him when he was unable to call home. He told me that he was almost wrapping up with everything concerning work, and he will be that husband and father again. I didn't feel even the tiniest bit of guilt. I was tired of him always having justification for all his actions. But I decided to end whatever was going on between me and Michael for the sake of my children. I told Michael that I didn't want to have any romantic relationship with him, and we should forget about whatever happened between us. But he will still be my confidant. I loved the void he filled. I didn't want him gone, but at the same time I didn't want it to go far. He totally understood and said that he even felt guilty whenever he saw Ken. So with that we decided to bury everything in the past. But like they say, nothing stays hidden forever. One evening, Ken returned home earlier than expected. I was upstairs sorting through the boys' stuff when I heard him scream my name in a way I hadn't heard before. I came downstairs and he was looking so excited as he told me that he got the promotion and that everything will return back to normal. He apologized for working so hard and not having time for our family, and now that he's on a higher level he won't have to do much workload again and everything will be perfectly fine. He was happy and he hugged me tightly, and I feigned happiness because I felt more guilty than happy for ever blaming him when he was doing everything he could to make sure we had what we were about to enjoy. That night, we decided to have a special dinner without the boys to celebrate his promotion. Then, as we were eating out of nowhere, he dropped the news that his boss was leaving town, and I said I was going to miss him, and that's when he looked at me confused. He just said, "Really?" And then proceeded to ask me why I would say that. Without thinking, I blurted out, "Well, honestly, he's more attractive than you." And I immediately regretted it. I don't know why I said that. Maybe because I was not happy hearing that Michael, the man I wanted to never leave my side, was leaving town and was going to stay with my husband who never cared or noticed anything about me anymore. But until I said it, I didn't know. But I said it as a joke. I knew that because no matter how I felt, I still wanted to stay married to Ken. But I could see my husband's face change. He didn't laugh. Instead, he just went quiet for a moment, and instantly my phone buzzed next to him. He picked it up without hesitation. His face went from bitter to sour as he looked at the screen, and then he turned the screen towards me and asked me to explain what the text meant. It was a message from Michael. He looked at me in disbelief and his eyes were filled with anger. I was very scared from the look on my husband's eyes, and his hand's grip on the phone was so strong and capable enough to destroy my phone. The thing is, as my husband mentioned, Michael was leaving the city to stay with his family. He resigned because he was done setting up his personal business ventures. The message on the phone was a farewell text, telling me he enjoyed all the time we spent together. I thought maybe I would have come up with a perfect lie to match the text. That's what I wanted to do. But Ken was already demanding for the truth with so much intensity. I couldn't lie. I wept as I told him everything that happened between me and Michael. I tried to explain, to tell him about the loneliness, the pain, the way I had felt invisible for so long. But he won't hear me out. Me and Michael didn't even do anything deep. It was an accident, and whatever happened was just once and we stopped. Because I loved Ken. No matter how distant he was, I loved our marriage and I loved our kids, and I didn't want anything to go wrong. But Ken didn't listen. Yes, I was consumed with guilt and regret. I begged him to hear me out, to let me explain. I told him I never meant for things to go that far and that I have been very understanding with him, and at least he should try to understand me as well. But he didn't. He said he couldn't trust me anymore and that the damage was done and that I had to leave. He gave me a few days to pack my things and figure out where I'd go. And he left the house for a few days because he couldn't stand me. The thought of leaving my boys and disrupting their lives was unbearable. I pleaded with Ken and told him we could fix things, anything to salvage what was left for the sake of our family. But he didn't want to fix anything. He told me that there was no going back from what I did, and that for me to have a pleasurable moment with Michael and still have the guts to say he was more attractive means I wanted out of our marriage. And I stopped loving him, and that hurts him badly. He said I had not betrayed only him, but the boys, when all what he ever did was for the family. But I didn't appreciate it. He reminded me I had a few days to leave the house before he returned, and that I shouldn't worry about the kids. He will take care of them. Thankfully, he had enough time. I was desperate. I had nowhere to go to. I couldn't go to Michael. He had left already, and I couldn't just let go of my children. They made me smile. They were the reasons for my daily happiness, and I couldn't just see myself living without them. I needed a solution to my problem. So I ran to Laura again. She listened as I poured out my fears, my confusion, and my shame. She told me with the same blunt honesty as before that Ken might never forgive me. Even if he did, she said, he would likely bury himself in his work again, leaving me to deal with the same void that had pushed me toward Michael in the first place. Laura came up with something drastic, which was selling the house, taking the boys, and leaving before Ken could act further. She told me I had suffered to take care of my kids and no woman would be able to do that for me, and I needed to protect the kids from the fallout to create a fresh start where we wouldn't be haunted by the shadow of my mistakes. At that time, I was too confused and overwhelmed to know if it was the right decision. I just needed something that would keep Ken close to me, perhaps make him reconsider his decision. But the idea of taking the boys away from their father felt like another betrayal. Left alone with my thoughts and my guilt, I began to see the depth of the damage I had caused. Laura's words echoed in my mind, but I didn't know what to do. I wanted my boys. I wanted to keep their lives as normal as possible. But Ken's anger was unrelenting. Ken was smarter than I had given him credit for. He found out about my plans before I could execute them. Whether it was through intuition or his meticulous nature, I don't know, but he uncovered my attempts to prepare for a life elsewhere with the boys. I'll never forget the look on his face when he confronted me. It wasn't just anger. It was real pain, deep and raw. He told me I had no right to take the boys away and that they needed stability, not the chaos I was creating. He told me I had destroyed the trust in our family, and now I was trying to run from the consequences. Then, with a voice colder than I thought possible, he told me to leave. He would handle the boys, the house, everything. He didn't want me there anymore. With nowhere else to go, I turned to my brother. His home was small and already crowded, but he welcomed me. Still, it wasn't a place I could stay for long. The thought of going back to my father's house crossed my mind, but his wife, my stepmother, had always made it clear I wasn't welcome. Her hatred towards me has never been hidden, and I knew she would make my life unbearable if I showed up there, so I don't know what to do anymore. I need a way out. Any advice on how to go about this would be well appreciated. Update. Hello Reddit, I am here again. My misery has only gotten worse and I regret every second of that joke. The trust in the family we had, I had ruined it in a matter of seconds, all for a stupid, careless comment. The guilt hit me harder than anything I'd ever felt, and each time I think about it, I start crying quietly non-stop, and now, I am unable to hold it in anymore. I couldn't believe how badly I had hurt him and how thoughtless I had been. I shouldn't have said what I said, and everything I do is futile. I couldn't get Michael back into my life. He had filed for divorce, saying that if he let it slide, who knows what would happen next time I find myself in such a situation, and if the thought of me couldn't stop me, then I should have thought of my children, but I didn't care. And he's right. I was selfish, and that's not right for a mother to act in that kind of way. And the moment the papers were served, it felt like the ground slipped from beneath me. I never imagined it would come to this, but I guess I should have known better. I had pushed him too far, said things I couldn't take back, did what I never should have, and watched as everything I had built started crumbling down. The divorce wasn't just about the end of our marriage, it was the end of a life I had gotten so comfortable with, a life that included our children. The custody battle was brutal. He was determined, and I could see how much he wanted to ensure the boys were with him. I tried to fight to prove I could be the mother they needed, but it wasn't enough. His lawyer tore apart my every move, every mistake I had made in the past, using it against me. In the end, the judge agreed with him and he was granted full custody, and I was left with visiting rights. Now, every day feels empty. I can't hold my children in the mornings, I can't kiss them goodnight, can't help them with their homework or listen to their small victories and struggles. The only time I get to see them is when I visit. Those few hours feel like both a blessing and a torment. It's fleeting and then I'm back to being alone, missing them with a depth I never knew was possible. I watch other mothers with their children, laughing, enjoying the little things, and it hits me all over again. I failed them, and now I have to live with the consequences. I never thought I'd be this person, the one who only gets to see her children in brief visits. It hurts in a way I can't explain, and no matter how many times I tell myself that I deserve this, the pain never quite goes away. But I have to move on. I can't keep drowning in regret and in the mistakes I've made. I've got to rebuild for myself. I've got to face this head on and find a way to make my life meaningful again, even if it's without the family I thought I'd always have. Maybe, just maybe, if he sees how much I've changed, how hard I've worked to grow and become better, he might reconsider. But for now, I've got to focus on myself. I've got to work on building a future. Thank you to everyone who has read this far. I'm not sure what the future holds, but I'm starting over. And that's all I can do.